Hello and welcome back. I'm Ipsha. And if you're here again, thank you for staying with this story. In Vixen Beyond the Veil, we follow tales that don't always reveal themselves all at once. Stories that change shape as attention gathers around them. This is a space for supernatural arcs told in fragments, where meaning accumulates and silence learns how to stretch. If you were here last time, you know the story began quietly. Oyun Sen left Kolkata for a quiet suburb and found a house that felt alert. Two local twins warned them, carefully, nervously, like the suburb had rules nobody wanted to say out loud. This is the idol that wanted witnesses. Part 2. The shop between two buildings. Because this is where an object enters the story, not as a threat, not as a relic, but as an invitation. A shop appears where it shouldn't. Something is taken home that was meant to be placed. And attention once drawn rarely knows how to let go. So before we continue, take a moment. Lower your voice, still your thoughts. Because from here on, the house is no longer the only thing paying attention. By the fourth day, the suburb had begun to reveal the small routines that governed it. The narrow windows of activity during which people emerged briefly from their houses to buy vegetables, collect newspapers, or walk aimlessly along the market road that bordered the locality. A stretch of pavement that appeared ordinary at first glance, lined with hardware stores, paan shops, and tailoring units whose shutters remained perpetually half-closed, as though each establishment had long since learned, in its own way, how much of itself it was willing to expose to the street. It was during one such unremarkable afternoon when Madhura suggested a walk under the pretext of buying household necessities that a narrow antique shop made itself visible, not by announcing its presence, but by fitting too neatly into a space where Oyun could not later remember as having been empty, narrow enough to be overlooked and yet impossible to ignore once noticed. Its frontage pressed between two familiar shops with an intimacy that felt newly negotiated rather than long established. The shop itself was dim, lit by a single yellow bulb that cast shadows far deeper than the room's modest size should have allowed. Its walls lined with shelves crowded by objects that resisted easy classification. Brass vessels dulled by age, framed photographs whose faces had faded into suggestion, cracked mirrors that reflected too much and too little at once, stacks of ledgers tied with string, and religious icons from traditions that did not usually coexist, arranged without reverence but with unmistakable care. Behind the counter stood the shopkeeper. He was thin to the point of severity, dressed in a plain, well-worn kurta and loose trousers, his hair graying but neatly kept, his posture straight in a way that suggested habitual stillness rather than effort, and his face, unremarkable at first glance, was made unsettling by his eyes, which did not roam the shop or linger on the objects, but remained fixed on people, assessing rather than welcoming, as though the merchandise was secondary to the visitors themselves. Madhura stopped abruptly, her hand hovering in midair, and leaned closer toward a high shelf near the back wall, where a small stone figure stood half-turned away from the room, its surface darkened by age and touch, its features worn smooth to the point of ambiguity, with no clear expression left to read, save for the unmistakable sense that it had once possessed a face and had since chosen not to present it.
"Oh, this is beautiful,"
she said softly, with the certainty of someone who had already decided the matter. The shopkeeper spoke without raising his voice.
"That one is not meant to be bought."
Madhura laughed, glancing back at Anirban.
Everything is meant to be bought, eventually.
No.
The shopkeeper replied, meeting her gaze steadily.
Some things are meant to be placed.
Anirban stepped closer, studying the idol with polite curiosity rather than desire.
It's an antique. We collect things like this.
The shopkeeper regarded him for a moment, then said,
Then you understand the difference between ownership and responsibility.
A brief silence followed, during which Oyon became aware of the air in the shop feeling heavier, cooler, reluctant to circulate, as though it had been disturbed by the conversation.
We'll pay whatever is appropriate.
Anirban said finally. The shopkeeper inclined his head, neither agreement nor refusal, and retrieved a cloth from beneath the counter, wrapping the idol carefully with the practiced movement of someone who had done so before, though perhaps not often, before accepting the money without counting it. As he handed the wrapped idol over, he said, almost conversationally,
If it stays with you, keep it where it cannot see.
Madhura frowned.
See what?
The shopkeeper's lips curved, not quite into a smile.
Anything new.
They left the shop moments later, the bell above the door sounding far too softly for the weight Oyon felt settle in his chest. And as they stepped back onto the market road, he turned instinctively to look behind them, only to pause, struck by the impression that the shop's interior appeared deeper than it had moments ago, its shadows stretching farther back than the narrow frontage should have allowed. Someone called his name.
Oyon.
The moment passed. Oyon looked away, dismissed the thought as the product of dim light and imagination, and followed his family home, unaware that the road behind them had already begun to forget the shape of the shop they had just left. From the moment the idol was brought into the house, the change announced itself not through noise or movement, but through attention, subtle and pervasive, as though the space had adjusted its focus, and Oyon, lingering near the doorway as his parents debated where the object should be placed, felt the uncomfortable impression that the room had learned something new about its occupants. The idol was set in the corner of the living room, partially obscured by a bookshelf, its cloth-wrapped form unassuming at a glance, and yet conversations began to curve gently in its direction. Voices lowering there without instruction, pauses lengthening and acquiring weight, no longer empty but expectant, as though silence itself had been taught to listen. Raghup stood apart, his expression unchanged, but his body betraying him in small, involuntary ways, the tightening of his jaw, the precise stillness with which he chose not to look directly at the idol, his quiet disapproval evident to anyone who knew him well enough to recognize it. Ira noticed first, not through fear, but irritation, halting mid-step when she realized she had drifted closer to the corner without meaning to, and stepping back sharply as though offended by the discovery.
No, I'm not sitting there,
She said finally, folding her arms.
Why?
Madhura asked, distracted.
because it feels like it's leaning.
Ira replied, frowning.
And I don't like things that lean when they don't have joints.
The attempt at humor did not land. That night, Oyon began to notice patterns that resisted explanation. The way arguments in the house dissolved without resolution when they drifted too close to the idol. The way doors were left ajar without anyone remembering opening them. And the way sleep felt lighter, as though the house itself were resting, but its occupants were not. Raghup said nothing that first night, nor the next, though Oyon noticed the way he began to rearrange small things with deliberate care, moving chairs a few inches away from the living room corner, closing doors that had previously been left open, and choosing to read in rooms where the idol was not within sight. his behavior marked by containment rather than alarm. It was only when Madhura mentioned casually with a forced laugh that the house felt different at night that Raghav paused.
Different how?
He asked.
Full,
She said after a moment.
as though something arrived and forgot to leave.
Raghav nodded once, as though confirming a thought he had already completed.
That object
He said calmly, without naming it.
does not belong in a house.
You mean it's cursed?
No, it is functional.
Raghav replied evenly. The word unsettled him.
Functional for what?
Ira asked, her sarcasm dulled into genuine unease.
For attention, some things do not enter places directly. They require witnesses.
Oyun realized then that his granduncle was not theorizing but recalling, his voice carrying the weight of experience rather than speculation. The change did not remain contained within the sane house for long. Within days, Uttarkanan itself began to behave differently, not in dramatic ways that demanded attention, but in small, accumulating inconsistencies that unsettled those who noticed them. Streetlights flickering without pattern, dogs refusing to cross certain stretches of road after sunset, conversations on neighboring verandas ending abruptly as though interrupted by something unspoken. Oyun heard of it first in fragments, from overhead remarks at the gate, from neighbors complaining that sleep felt restless, that nights seemed longer than they used to, that silence had developed an edge. And it was only when he mentioned these things in passing to his parents that he realized they too had been collecting similar observations without connecting them. Ira stopped making jokes entirely. Anirban began standing at the window long after dark, listening rather than watching. Madhura rearranged the house again, this time without explanation, as though instinct rather than intention guided her movements. It was during one such evening when the suburb felt collectively alert that Oyun finally sought out Ritvik and Rohan. Oyun found the twins near the bend in the road, Ritvik unusually subdued, Rohan already watching the shadows rather than the street. And when Oyun described what had been happening, not just in his house but beyond it, Rohan nodded repeatedly, relief evident in his posture.
It's spreading.
Rohan said quietly.
That's what happens when something stops being ignored.
Ritvik swallowed.
People are talking now. That's never good.
It's not supposed to be in a house.
Rohan continued, his voice steadier than before.
Not once it's noticed.
Oyun realized then that the problem was no longer confined to walls or rooms, but had begun to teach the suburb itself how to pay attention. And that's where we'll stop for tonight. It isn't just the house anymore. If this one stays with you, let it. Beyond the veil, not everything needs to be understood, only acknowledged. If you found yourself drawn into this story, you can support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. It helps these stories find the people who are meant to hear them. Part 3 is next. And that's where the rules become real. Until then, thank you for listening, for sharing this time, and for trusting me with your attention. I'm Ipsha. This was Vixen Beyond the Veil. Take care of yourself, and when you're ready, you can step back into the world.